Okay. I think we're ready to go. Harold is in the building. Jonathan is in the house. So I think we're ready to go. Can you guys just maybe put the 100 emoji if you're all hearing me well? Some emojis if you're hearing me. If you're hearing me. Good to go. Good to go. Good to go. Yes. Today we have this Twitter space on player recruitment in African football. We have some interesting gentlemen here who are going to share their perspectives with us. So maybe just to introduce ourselves, I'm Sultan Sulis, the founder of Next Pro Sports Management, player management agency in Uganda. And you can check out more details at nextprosports.com. We have Harold. Harold, can you unmute and introduce yourself?
Hi guys, welcome to the space. My name is Harold Atkwatse. I'm a corporate and sports lawyer in Kampala, Uganda, and also a founder of Phenom Sports Management and an
Brilliant.
administrator at Saltillo Bright Stars Football Club.
Very good. Welcome on board, Harold.
Thank you.
Yes, Jonathan. Jonathan, can you unmute and introduce yourself? Hello, Jonathan. Jonathan. Let me try and rebring Jonathan on. Okay, hold on. Yes, I said.
Testing.
Yes, 1, 2. Come on board. You're live and clear.
Hi, Sultan. Hi, Harold. Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining yet. Been added to the stage. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. I am the co-founder of Future Global Sports, which is a sports management consultancy based in the UK. And we've also worked in a lot of different markets and worked with different variety of players, including African players. I'm also the founder and publisher of Just Football, which is a world football website in which we have covered several tournaments in Africa, African Cup of Nations, and things like that. So I also run the Nordic Football Podcast, which is a Scandinavian based podcast on football in Scandinavia. So pleasure to be with you all. Sultan, thanks for setting this up. Harold, it's really nice to be on the stage with you. And I'm looking forward to chatting about recruitment in African football. I think it's going to be an exciting discussion.
Fantastic. Let's get started, man. Let's get started. I'm very curious about what you guys have in stock. Let me bring Harold back on stage. Harold, I just wanted you to give us some insights on the African market. You know, we have seen some good products over the years. Maybe recently we have seen the Mo Salahs, the Saido Manes. You know, so I wanted to have your insight on why this market is really, you know, so good and so attractive for these top leagues.
Thank you, Sultan. And good evening once again to everybody on the space. Africa has for the longest time been a cradle of some of the best footballers in Europe and in other leagues. From the early 90s with the George Weahs, from our very own Majid Musisi in Turkey, from the Peles. We've dominated Europe, we've dominated the French leagues, we've dominated the Spains. And can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Hello? Hello? Oh yeah, let me just go on. So yeah, we've dominated some of the best leagues in the world for quite some time. And you cannot have a conversation about football without, especially European football, without talking about African football. We have over the years been a very, very good source for talent. Even back here in Uganda, we haven't had so many players play in Europe. But when you speak of countries like Nigeria, countries like Ivory Coast, when you speak of countries like Ghana, they've had tremendous success in Europe. When we remember the teams of Nigeria, like the team that dominated the 1996 Olympics. Almost everybody in that team played in Europe. The Nwanko Kanus, the JJ Okochas, the Taribo Wests, the Sunday Olises, and many others. When you bring it a little bit back home, you can remember the 2010 World Cup in South Africa and how Ghana flew our flag so high into the quarterfinals, which I think is the best we've ever done. We've also had stars like the Didier Drogbas, the Emmanuel Adebayos, the Mo Salahs of now, Riyad Mahrez, and so many others all over Europe. But really, we've been a very, very, very good cradle for football on the European market. And most of the players, some have been lucky to be recruited from Europe, especially in France. Those who come from West Africa and I think North Africa, the likes of the Zinedine Zidanes who have their roots in Northern Africa, Riyad Mahrez, Karim Benzema, and others. Then we have the crop that's from West Africa, maybe the Kalidou Koulibaly, the N'Golo Kantes, and many others that we know. Our biggest, when you talk to most people about African footballers, when you talk to most people in Europe about African footballers, what has sold them over the years has usually been pace and power. People will tell you, we're looking for a strong, energetic guy who can play like Didier Drogba, someone who can play like George Weah. We haven't had so many people sold for their skills like Mo Salah has been sold this year, like Riyad Mahrez. Most people have been for the pace and power aspect of their games, which is, I think we've seen Romelu Lukaku come out and complain about and say, look, when I make a dribble, it's not because I'm a skilled footballer, it's because I have pace and power. I've beaten him with my pace and power and things of the sort. So our dominance in Europe has really been about the pace and power aspect. And that's what most African footballers who have made it out of here. I remember having a conversation with Sonko, the former Wigan and I think Wigan footballer in 2018, when he was here with Emmanuel Eboe. And I was telling him about Ugandan footballers like Nelson Senkatuka, Paul Muchurezi, Shaban Muhammad at the time. And he said, look, these are really talented footballers, but it won't be easy for them to make it out there if they are not this big or they're not this fast or they're not this powerful. And I could see where he was coming from, something that Eboe confirmed also and said, no, look, we make it because we work, we're eager to work and show that we work extra, we put in an extra effort and we were admired for that. So that's what recruitment from Africa has looked in the past. Yeah, that's what I can say on that for now.
Yes, Harold, thank you very much for that. I just want to briefly bring on Jonathan. Jonathan, what do you think of the African market, man? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think he makes some really interesting points, Harold, there. And I think the main challenge is when you look at recruitment in African football is kind of, the first thing to state is that every kind of continent has a different kind of flavor to it, doesn't it? And there's always that kind of end goal of the desire to see an African team win a World Cup. And that's kind of, for me, when you look at African football, that's kind of like the end goal. I think the furthest that we came in terms of achievement-wise was probably the South Africa 2010 World Cup. Who here can probably forget that? And obviously, Luis Suarez, forever an enemy of the African people after what happened in the Ghana game. And that progress as well of being there. And obviously, I was there in South Africa in 2010 to witness it and seeing Africa kind of taking its place on the global stage. And I think that when you kind of reflect on African football, I think that's kind of the end goal of it, isn't it? We want to see players, we want to see stakeholders, we want to see people involved, people on the stage, kind of making an impact in the game in a fair and equitable way. And there's been steps taken to kind of hopefully achieve that, but of course there's a long way to go. I think when you look at the likes of Samuel Eto'o, Didier Drogba, Mo Salah right now, Sadio Mane, those players kind of act as tent poles for, what can be achieved and the ability. But of course, part of this discussion today is of course going to be around the challenges as well, and kind of, I think people working within the game of football, our responsibility to make sure that the pathways are there, to make sure that the ability to kind of maximize the potential of the continent, it can be realized not only through players, but also through people working in the game, people like Sultan, people like Harold, people who can sort of go from wherever they are, whichever country, and maximize their potential and help the next generation to kind of develop as well. So I think there's so many. I mean, I always say when talking about Africa, we're talking about 52 plus countries here. So it's very difficult to generalize, and it's not the best thing to do to generalize. But of course, a lot of the challenges within African football are quite unique to the continent. Even if it's country by country perspective, slight differences and slight nuances. But ultimately, I think player recruitment plays a huge part of that. And I think that's kind of what we are here to talk about today, isn't it? And how we can make those pathways smoother and easier for everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you for that insight, Jonathan. We have some pretty good guys in the spaces down there. I'm going to invite you guys at some point with your questions and everything. But I want to bring back Harold. And Harold, you're an administrator at one of the football clubs in the Uganda Premier League, the Bright Stars, and just maybe to give us the brief recruitment process, like in the local league. How do you go about with this recruitment process? I've been in situations with you where you've recruited players, you've recruited managers and stuff like that. So could you just give us a brief insight into that process of a local club in a country like Uganda?
Thank you, Sultan. I'll start with a story about Bright Stars, just to put things into perspective. I joined Bright Stars in 2017, the 2017-18 football season, July 2017. And at that time, Bright Stars had a junior team, or Saltillo Bright Stars junior team, but they were not paying attention to it. It was their 5th season in the league, the Premier League, when I joined, but it was not a major point of recruitment. Their main recruitment at the time was Masaza and other football clubs. Say KCCA is releasing a certain Sultan, or Villa is releasing a certain Harold, or Jonathan, you bring him into your club. And that had seemed to work for some time, and the juniors had been alienated. And the junior league, I think at that time, was in their 3rd or 4th season. I think 3rd season, the FUFA Juniors League. So at the time, I found almost the average age at Bright Stars was easily 29, between 27 and 29. That was a problem because it affected continuity, because it affected productivity on the pitch. These were older players. And also had budget implications, because the salaries that you cannot pay to players who are in that age bracket are the salaries that you can give to players who are starting their careers in the Premier League. So when I came on, we set to change that And the first person I called onto Bright Stars was Ian Mutenda. I think most of them know Ian. Most of you guys know Ian. Ian is the current technical director of Bright Stars. So when Ian came on, we set onto working closely with the junior team, the Bright Stars junior team at that time. It was coached by Frank Molindwa. And the next thing we did was to, whichever players came in, they had to be below 24. But our target really was to target players between 18 and 21. Because I believe that's the age. By 21, someone should have established themselves as a footballer. In the bigger majority of footballers in the world will have established themselves. At least they'll have an identity in football by the age of 21. So we set out to do that. We tried a level best to promote some of the juniors in the junior team. At that time, we had Derek Were, who we just brought on, who we just re-signed as a goalkeeper. We had a few other guys whose names I can't remember offhand. But I mean, when we brought them into the senior team fold, the head coach at the time said, no, these guys cannot compete. You have to let them go elsewhere or it won't work. But that coincided with the time when Mike was bringing in the Alan Okellos, when Mike was bringing in the Mustafa Kizas, and so many other kids who followed that from the KCCA junior team. And this is the junior team that we were beating well head over shoulders in the juniors league. So we tried to make a case for the junior team being our main recruitment place, for it to be our main recruitment strategy to the head coach, but he wasn't buying that. So for the 2 seasons, 17-18 and 18-19, we really, I think, had easily the oldest players in the league. But towards the end of that season, the head coach's contract was done and we had to let him go. And we started afresh on our recruitment strategy. I think that season we brought in, there's a picture that Clive Chaze shared a few months ago, and we were signing, I think, 14 players at the time, which for me was total rubbish, total garbage. Why are you signing 14 players a month to the start of a new season? But yeah, we brought in 14 guys, and that was highlighted by Davis Sekaja, who's a star with the under-20 team. And Davis Sekaja and a few other guys who were a bit unknown, like Ande Chambade was, I think, 19 at the time. We got him from Hope Doves, a team that I had played at. Unfortunately, it's no longer in existence, but it's a team that I played at in the 3rd division. And a few other youngsters. There's Ronald Nkonge, he just went to Zambia this year. Court Moses at the time, Henry Chiwanuka, and a few other guys. Really, everybody we brought on that time, with the exception of, I think, Sewato and Godwin Bule Chiwanuka, was below 21. We started working closely with our junior team to make sure that at least every season we promote 3 to 5 players. That became a thing, and the head coach knew it. We brought the junior team into the senior team fold to help with the recruitment, and his sole purpose of being there was to make sure that at least he shares his knowledge of the junior team players with the senior team coaches, and also to invite the senior team coaches to see these guys. The following year, that's when I think Norman Odipio came on to join Sekaja. We also got in a few other lads, still below 20. But we really set out to make our junior team functional and to make it a main point of recruitment. And if you ask me, it's worked. This season we promoted 3 other guys, Shamron Kamya, the current under-17 national team goalkeeper, Issa Bugembe, and Ivan Irene Mbabazi, who represented Uganda also at the under-17 level. And they're all going to be starters in the current team, and their futures look bright. Ivan is particularly interesting because he's 6'3" at 17. very good midfielder, holding midfielder. But yeah, that junior team has, that Saltillo Bright Stars aspect has helped to bring in the junior team as a main point of recruitment for us. The other point of recruitment, which I believe we share with almost all the other football clubs in Uganda, is the Masaza tournament. I don't know if any of us have watched the Masaza, but the Masaza is easily one of the most popular football tournaments in Uganda, and I think they have the biggest viewership. If you go to a Masaza game, you might mistake it for a Uganda Cranes game. What happens with the Masaza? Usually, the Masaza recruit from the different villages all over the country. It's a Buganda tournament between the Masazas of Buganda, but I don't know what's Masaza in English.
Man, I'm not. I don't know. I think are they villages?
No. Villages,
Sazas,
Chalo.
Sazas are like
Sazas.
villages.
No, Sazas as I don't know. Who should I ask here? Timothy Kutesa. What are Sazas in English?
I don't. Anyway, we shall get the Sazas later. Let's
Yes.
continue.
So the Masazas, it's something that's organized in the Buganda Kingdom for the different. I think I can call them the different regions of Buganda. It's an annual tournament and it attracts some of the biggest crowds around the country. Usually, their players are young lads from the Coca-Cola tournaments and different high school tournaments or different village tournaments and all those other small tournaments that are played around the country. It's one of the biggest showcase of talents. I think he has to mention some of the guys who have played there currently. Almost the whole of the team that played against Rwanda today, with the exception of a few, have played there. And players like it, especially at the younger age, because it's a bit more lucrative than playing in the big league or in the lower divisions of Ugandan football. So the Masaza is the second and one of the most popular recruitment points. The other one is the Copa Coca-Cola. I think we've all grown up watching those tournaments, the Copa Coca-Cola tournaments, especially those of you who went to schools like St. Mary's Chitende, schools like Chivuli, schools like Ntare in Western Uganda, schools like Vara Boys in West Nile, and then so many others that take part in the Copa Coca-Cola. Budo SS, not King's College, but Budo SS, King's College's neighbors, Mengo, Old Kampala, and a few others. Now, Copa Coca-Cola is also an annual tournament. I think the last edition brought onto the stage guys like Abdul Salim at Villa, Bobo Sibiaruhanga, who are representing Chitende, Karim Watambala, who's a national team player. Bobos, you just seen Bobos on your TVs today playing against Rwanda. The Aziz Kayondos, the Mustafa Kizas who represented Kivuli and Kakungulu. So many kids. It's like the biggest showcase of teenagers playing football in Uganda. And it's a main recruitment point. I can remember the time when we had Medi Kiseka at Bright Stars in 2019 was because of his exploits in that tournament, and we're looking to make that tournament a main recruitment point. He sort of like had a database of, I think in that year he was coaching Nakaseke International School. But yeah, what we're looking for is to tap into his knowledge. And in his previous year, he had coached guys like the Oloyas, the Hassan Waswas, the Robert Sentongos, and so many others in that same Copa Coca-Cola tournament. And I think in the past, when it was better organized, the winning team would go to South Africa for a tournament with other schools. And that's Copa Coca-Cola at the third recruitment point. The Copa Coca-Cola, by the way, usually the winner I think the winner from Uganda, or the best two teams from Uganda, usually compete at a regional level in East Africa. Second edition was hosted, I think, in Tanzania, if I'm sure. And we've continued to emphasize the Copa Coca-Cola. If you look at our coaching setup right now, we have Frank Mulindwa, who is very, very, very big on schools football as a head of our youth team. Our assistant coach, Simon Peter Mugera, is big on schools football with Budo SS. He's also big with Masaza. I think he's won the Masaza twice. He's won the schools football tournaments with Budo SS on 3 occasions. Yeah, and then the fourth recruitment point is the lower division clubs, the regional leagues, and the fourth and fifth division, the third, fourth, and fifth divisions of Ugandan football. Many might not know a thing about them, but in every region, I'll give an example of Kampala. I'll give an example of Kawempe, where Bright Stars comes from. We started out in the Kawempe District FA League and played our way all the way to the Uganda Premier League. And that the district league was the 5th division. We later on joined the Kampala League, and then went on to join the big league, which is the second tier, and then the Premier League in 2013. But in 1997, when we were formed, we started out in the 5th tier. So teams and you can imagine we had players like Bernard Mwanga, who is a former national team captain, playing for us. So that has also become a big point of recruitment. I just told you that one of our standout players, who I think is one of the best defenders in the country, Andy Chambade, who might easily be a second or third or fourth most important player at Bright Stars right now, came from a 3rd division team, Hope Doves, a few years ago. And very many other players have come through that. Bashir Sekaja, who was at Vipers last season. I don't know where he is right now, but he was at Vipers and at KCC the season before, and at UPDF the other season. He played out from Hope Doves, which was a 3rd division club at the time. So yes, those are the 4 recruitment points I know for sure that the Uganda Premier League teams use. I'll welcome anyone to supplement.
Those are some of the recruitment streams that most of the clubs in Africa as well use. The junior team has been a very, very good thing. We have seen it develop in most of the countries as well. Masaza, specifically for Uganda, that's a very, very big tournament. The Copa Coca-Cola competition, the schools competition, in other words, has been a very, very big thing. Then, of course, the lower league teams. But I wanted to bring Jonathan back on. I don't know if he can get back on right now. Jonathan, are you back on? Jonathan, come on. Come back on.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes. Jonathan, we have seen the stories of most of the stars who are playing in the top European leagues, and their journey has not been from Africa direct to these European clubs. It's either been through maybe a lower league club in Sweden or a lower league club in France or Switzerland, and that's where they make their trade from. So I wanted to get your view on what are some of those lower leagues that most of the African players can go and maybe build a name for themselves for some of these top clubs?
Yeah, good question, and some really good points from Harold there as well. I think the first place to start is if you look at kind of there's a report that you can download, which I strongly recommend for anyone who doesn't have access to it. It's called the FIFA Global Transfer Market Report, and they do an annual report on kind of trends and themes of the transfer window. Of course, with the past report in 2020. COVID has had a big impact on the trends we see, but there are still some sort of consistent themes that you notice. So I picked out a few sort of interesting points that could be used for discussion, and then I'll sort of talk a little bit about, you know, the traditional pathway for African players potentially into becoming, you know, the Mo Salah of the football world. So if we look at the Global International Transfer Market Report, 180 nationalities were involved in transfers in 2020, 180 different nationalities. But of those 180 nationalities, only 50% came from, 50% of them, 50% of all transfers in 2020 came from just 10 countries. So when you think about it, that's an incredible concentration of nations, smaller number of nations involved in most 50% of the transfers in the world in 2020. The predominant top three nationalities were Brazil, Argentina, and the UK. Brazil and Argentina are the top two exporting nationalities in world football, basically, in terms of producing players and exporting them. But if you look in the top 10 of those 50% of those 10 countries, Nigeria and Ghana are in the top 10 of the world for exporting players, essentially. So what you see there is 20% of the top 50% of the world's international transfers come from Ghana and Nigeria, in other words, have come from Africa. So that just shows you the level and the sheer depth of talent that can be potentially found in African football. Of course, you might question then, why do the West African nations dominate that kind of international transfer market? And that's maybe a discussion for another day. I know we have Sultan, a proud Ugandan in the crowd, and East African football, I think, is strongly on the rise in an area that, you know, Sultan and myself were kind of focusing on. And I think definitely there may be announcements there to come in the future on that in terms of how we work. But, you know, that just shows you that if you've got 20% of the world's international transfers that are involving African players in that sense. So despite this, though, African countries are only received less. The amount of money going out of African football, essentially what I'm trying to say, from players, African football clubs receive more than 3 times the amount that they're spending, according to this report. So you've got kind of 300 million roughly that they exported to countries in Europe in the last transfer window, and elsewhere, even for example to CONCACAF, I think 19 million, CONMEBOL 22 million, UEFA 510 million, and even the Asian Federation 298 players. So what you're seeing essentially is a lot of money going out of African football, but what is happening to the money that's coming into African football? Is that being well utilized, well made to develop the country, to develop the infrastructure, to develop the resources? Of course, at the moment, there's been a lot of talk about FIFA maybe introducing a global kind of a European, an African Super League, the equivalent of the European Super League that, you know, caused such a strong reaction in Europe when it was suggested. But there's potential talks about that maybe happening in African football. Will that be to the benefit of African football and players and exports? Is a discussion, I suppose, for everyone to think about at this moment in time. But to touch on Sultan's point and just to kind of answer it as quickly as I can, I mean, I think the traditional pathway, I suppose, is, you know, I know we've got some people from the audience in Sweden as well, for example. So you would maybe look at a player. I could look at a player and I would say a good example right now that we have maybe is someone, a player at Hammarby. His name is Akinkunmi Amu. He's a Nigerian player. Now, he kind of started his career in Nigeria. He was then brought to Hammarby in Sweden. And then the traditional pathway, as someone who studies Scandinavian football very well and is quite well connected there, traditionally, we kind of joke about it on our podcast that they always will end up, if they do well, in either Belgium or the Netherlands or maybe Turkey. Those are the sort of 3 markets that maybe look at them most strongly. There's a player, for example, Odilon Kosunu, who was at Hammarby. He then moved to Belgium, and I believe now he's at Bayer Leverkusen. So that kind of, you know, that pathway. And if you look at Bayer Leverkusen, they also have a player called Edmund Tapsoba, who's from Burkina Faso. And now Tapsoba has reached that level where he's now on the profile of top European clubs. And his next pathway will probably be from Bayer Leverkusen to the Premier League. So there you kind of see a snapshot, just using a couple of players, of how that pathway happens. Now, how does it happen from a literal perspective in terms of player recruitment? That's where the challenges are in this discussion, because you also have, while we have a lot of success stories, and if you look at, for example, Sadio Mane, he went from Senegal to Metz, obviously in France. They have a Generation Foot, which is an academy. And then from Metz, obviously, I think he went to Salzburg, and then he's come to Europe via that route and gone to Liverpool and been incredible. So you kind of start to see the pathways that are there. I think the challenges for players is making sure that you're aligned with the right people and making sure that you kind of working with people who have your best interests at heart from point A to point B. Point A being your starting place. That could be you could be in a village in Ghana or Senegal or Uganda. And your point B, obviously, your ultimate dream goal perhaps is going to the Bundesliga or playing in Europe, playing in Scandinavia, playing in France or winning the Premier League. So to get from point A to point B, we see a lot of wastage and we see a lot of problems in the sense of players maybe choosing the wrong person to represent them and sort of falling out of the game. There was a study from Al Jazeera, which was an incredible study where it kind of showcased and had examples of African players who kind of were sort of signed by rogue agents who would then they would pay these agents their family's whole entire savings to go to Europe. And in one really sad sort of case study, they were taken to a random country and just dumped by the agent. The agent pretended that there were trials waiting for them, and it talked about the mental health impact on the family and just the terrible being taken advantage of. And players often can end up kind of homeless in a random country in, say, Bulgaria or Eastern Europe, somewhere like that. This case study showed that this kind of thing is quite prevalent, quite rife. So it's really, really important to have the right infrastructure, have the right clubs who have players' interest at heart. Of course, it has to be a value prospect for the club. They have to maybe make something out of it. But working with people in those markets that kind of understand football, have the interest of the player at heart, and can help take them from step to step. So, if you were looking just to finalize and summarize, if you were looking at, as I said there, a player like Akinkunmi Amu, the question is, do they come from a private academy or do they come from the league structure? Now, speaking about Nigerian football, which is an area I know a bit more about than say perhaps Ugandan football, which Sultan can talk about and Harold can talk about. If you look at the actual clubs within Nigerian football, within the league structure, you would see that private academies are arguably doing more in terms of exporting players than the clubs themselves. And you have to ask yourself why that is. And again, like I say, this is another conversation maybe for another day because there's so many shoots you can go off on this conversation. But if you look at the case of Victor Osimhen, who's at Napoli, for example, now, Osimhen started in a private academy in Nigeria. I don't think he actually came through the club system in Nigeria, and that's just a glimpse of kind of where we see a discrepancy between private academies and clubs. So if you're asking, are we trying to develop African football, the leagues and the league infrastructure itself? Or are we trying to develop the players and kind of with no real consideration for the leagues? And that's a debate that kind of is ongoing in the football world at the moment. But traditionally, just to summarize, I think Scandinavia is a fantastic sort of launch point. We're seeing now a bit more. Sultan, you'll be able to tell me about a couple of Ugandan players who have gone directly to America, MLS and that kind of thing. And that's potentially a pathway that may increase in the future. And I think as well, we do see some cases in, for example, South America, Eastern Europe, maybe the likes of Latvia, Moldova. If you look at Abdullah Sima, who is a very highly rated prospect at the moment, he obviously went to Czech Republic, for example, and I think he started in Eastern Europe his career. So there's a lot of pathways. I know most about Scandinavia. That's my bread and butter sort of thing, and I think certainly there's a lot of benefits in terms of Scandinavian football, but as always in football, it's a constantly evolving space.
Yes. I think we have yes, in the Ugandan football we have seen a lot of movements we have seen, I think, a couple of movements to the USA, but most of the movements have been maybe to North Africa. Then the East Africa has been there. Dennis Onyango has been doing well in the South, and we have had a couple of goalkeepers who have gone down there as well. But I wanted to bring Harold back, and we see, it's now a conversation of private academies and the leagues. And when you talk about how the African leagues have been so weak over the past years and so on, the first thing that comes to your mind is lack of infrastructures for the development of these players. And when it comes to money and federations, we have had cases of mismanagement, corruption, lack of seriousness, and all this lack of planning surrounding that thing. how much is it an effect on a player's development at the point where we're now seeing maybe private clubs, private academies are coming in, and instead of us growing the leagues, how much is that an effect in the player development process?
Thank you, Sultan. You've touched on maybe 3 or 4 or 5 points in one, but
yeah.
The biggest problem on the African continent is lack of infrastructure. And the lack of infrastructure, of course, comes from lack of funds, but it shouldn't necessarily be the lack of funds at some. But the biggest point is usually lack of proper leadership, because I mean, we've seen countries, people have usually compared us to, have of late compared us to Rwanda in terms of almost everything we do, but Rwanda has managed to put up a few, not really international standard, but good playing surface, good facilities, and a few other conveniences. They managed to put up at least 10 stadia in their country. Whereas here in Uganda, we can only speak of maybe 1 or 2, Philip Omondi and Chitende. Yet we receive, I believe, the same amount of money from FIFA for FIFA projects. But it's mostly, our biggest problem here is mostly lack of infrastructure. Our boys grow up playing in some of the worst conditions, and it's hard to, usually when you sit down and you're comparing people who are playing, kids who are playing under 15 football in Europe or in other continents in the Americas, and the ones who are here, you'll see a very big gap in terms of infrastructure development, and we all very well know that that affects the end product of the football they're playing. The other aspect has been the lack of documentation or data. A couple of times people have asked me, I've tried to put some players out there, and people ask you, do you have their videos? Do you have their footage? Have you a full match or a compilation of what they've done in the past 3 years? And it's impossible to have. I'll give an example of here in our country. Last year, Sanyuka televised less than 100 football games. That means there's so many other football games that were going on without any recorded footage. So when you're trying to sell a player out of those clubs that didn't have televised or that didn't have recorded matches, it becomes a problem, because it's like me telling you, oh, you can come and buy this piece of land and you've never seen it. Those 2 points have stood out so much. On the point of private academies versus established professional teams, that hasn't been a very big trend in East and Central Africa, but it's a very big trend in West Africa. It's a big trend in West Africa mainly because they have had decades and decades of professional footballers coming out of that region. So most of these come back and set up these academies. Some of these academies have also been set up by European clubs that intend to use them as feeder points, which has not been the case in this part of Africa. I don't know why more players come out of West Africa than Eastern Africa, but that's a story for another day. But right now in Uganda, the main recruitment point is the formal junior team structures, the junior teams that are attached to, we call them academies, well, for that name, but they're usually attached to senior teams. There are few private academies. I know there's Excel, that's Patrick's academy. I know there's Edgar's, though Edgar's takes part, I think, in the lower divisions of Ugandan football. I think in the 3rd division, there is Prosper's Academy. But even for these academies, their recruitment points have not been, for lack of a better word, I'll say they've not been original, because they recruit from the same points that these clubs recruit from. I mean, from high schools. Very few kids have gone into these academies when they can't kick a ball, and they end up graduating after 3 or 4, 5 years, after a full football education in 4 or 5 years. So in Uganda, our football is centered around schools, which schools feed the clubs we have in the Premier League and in the big league, which is the second tier. And then the progression starts from there. Maybe North Africa after that, Ethiopia, Southern Africa. We've had a few people go to the Scandinavia. Very few have come up. Very few have become stars. I think the latest one I can remember is Abdul Umala.
Yeah.
Who came out of here straight to Sweden, and then Sweden or Denmark, one of the two, and then onto the national team, and then onto Pyramids FC in Egypt. There are very
I think
many.
Abdul was in the same category as Moses Waiso as well.
Yeah, Waiso went and came back.
Yeah.
But Uganda straight to Europe has not been a thing for the longest time. Mostly because of the low standards that we've set in the country for football. It's not for lack of talent, for sure. We have the talent to play football, but we've set very, very, very low standards for ourselves. Of course,
does this relate to the players as well? Are the players also not setting a big standard for themselves? Is that something that is affecting them on a player level?
When you speak of players, I wouldn't want to blame the players for per se. For me, actually, the most underperforming category of Ugandan football personnel are the coaches. Most of our coaches lack the basic coaching education, and whatever they transfer to the players is usually not enough to meet the international standards. I'll give an example of, in the 90s and in the early 2000s, we had our best coaches here go out to Europe to study. The Mike Mutebis, the Sam Simbas, the Simbes. All of them are German educated, German and other countries. The current crop of coaches we have, most of them have been educated through the CAF coaching system, coaching development system. This entails them taking 1, 2, 3 weeks of study at Njeru Technical Center, and then they graduate. Most of the players we want to take out there, people ask questions of why do our Ugandan footballers flop? The truth is they flop because their technical education is not up there. Their talent, their hard work sometimes, their physical conditions are very, very, very good. But the technical aspects of their games are lacking. And that's what has always left us. That's what has made most Ugandan footballers fail to cut the grade. I have been involved with clubs outside Uganda, in Asia to be specific, in trying to sell them players, and they tell you point blank, if your players are from Uganda or East Africa or Africa, bring us defenders, do not bring us midfielders. And they're trying to be polite. They're trying to politely tell you that we do not think your midfielders have the technical capacity to play at this level. But if you bring us defenders, we can teach them 1 or 2 things as long as they have the basics in place. And I mean, you've seen our best exports have been goalkeepers and defenders over the years. The Timothy Batawaires, the Onyangos, Ismawa Tenga now, Postneto Moni from the past, Nestro Ichizito, and defensive midfielders, Tony Mawejes, Khalid Aucho, and very many others have been defensive players, 1 to 6. That explains what I'm trying to say about the lack of technical ability. Our coaches need to do better. Unfortunately, it's not in their hands. The federation has to expose them to better education. I know a few coaches here who've gone ahead and done the UEFA coaching courses, like David Oboa. And when you sit down and listen to David, And when you talk to the players who have gone through David's hands, know that there is a very, very big difference from the players who've gone through the normal
I
Ugandan
remember. I
coaches.
remember. He was part of the technical team of the Lango province when they're in the
Yeah,
FUFA drum. And man, you guy, his
yeah,
training session. If you talk to the players, is a
yeah.
different beast, man. I'm surprised he's not in the league.
I've spoken to David about coming into the league, and he's very uncompromising. I mean, he says there are certain things he cannot compromise on if he's to come in, and most of the teams he says do not meet the standards that he requires to work on. He's worked at Maroons before,
Yeah, I remember.
and I actually was looking forward to working with him at Bright Stars, but I mean, it didn't happen.
Good luck with that. Good luck with that.
It
let
didn't
me let me
happen.
let me bring back
Yeah.
Jonathan a bit on that note of we've Jonathan, can you come back, please? Come back. Jonathan. Yes, he's back. Now, Jonathan, he has talked about the technical abilities of the players in African football, and this is something that is very serious. We have seen some of the players go to Europe maybe for trials in some of the academies and some of the clubs there, and whenever they come back, they never go back, and the feedback is never a positive one. But how is the technical abilities? I know you've scouted a lot of games, you've watched a lot of players. How much is the technical abilities an area of importance for some of those clubs that side?
Yeah, and again, really, really good points and really good discussion. I'm enjoying it. I think Harold has just touched there on the biggest challenge, and I think probably the biggest area, if not holding African football back, certainly the biggest sort of maybe unspoken challenge. I think the best example of this, there's two examples I'll probably touch on. One, I would say, I think Yaya Toure is a very, very good reference point in this discussion about typecasting of players, because if you were to ask me what are the key, Sultan, if I was to ask you now what are the key attributes of Yaya Toure as a footballer, I think 90% of the players in this room, or people in this room, or people in general in the football world would say, well, he's physical, he's aggressive, he's quick, pace and power, quote unquote. But actually, Yaya Toure was one of the most graceful, gifted, sort of silky footballers in the Premier League for about 4 to 5 years. Certainly a key part of that Manchester City team that kind of won the Premier League for the first time in their history. Premier League, not obviously the English Football League, but the quote-unquote Premier League, which began in '92. And he was a key part of that. And he was as creative and had as much vision and had as much ability on the ball as someone like David Silva. But David Silva was always sort of typecast in a particular way, and Yaya Toure was always typecast in a particular way. I'll never forget Yaya Toure. There was a key game where Manchester City, I think it was a season they beat Liverpool to the title. I think it was 2014 when they were battling for that title with Brendan Rodgers, where I think they beat Villa about 5-0 or something like that. And Yaya Toure picked the ball up in the halfway line. I think it was 0-0 at the time, or the game was very open. Yaya Toure picked the ball up around the halfway line and beat 3 or 4 players, dribbled past all of them, and smashed it into the goal. And kind of basically that was the launchpad for City kind of winning the title. That season where Liverpool kind of collapsed with Gerrard and the slip and everything like that. But if you were to ask, as I said, people within the football world, what is Yaya Toure's typecast? It's pace and power and it's athleticism. It's the same with Paul Pogba. Paul Pogba is, as a player, he's closer to Zinedine Zidane than he is maybe, say, Claude Makélélé. But people will typecast Pogba and expect him to be this kind of destroyer or use his body. He always gets criticism about maybe the defensive side of his game. That's not really his game, and Zinedine Zidane was never really expected to be a defensive kind of maestro. Pogba's there for his grace, his ability on the ball, his long-range passing, his ability to cut diagonal passes, and that kind of thing. And of course, you might want to criticize other areas of his game, but the point I'm making about when we look at, and Pogba's French, but I'm going to lean on his Guinean heritage here just to kind of make my debate a bit more consistent. But the point I'm making is, the big challenge that African footballers face when you look at a European perspective is, of course, European football dictates the standards and dictates where the market goes. So if Sultan has a Ugandan player, for example, that he's working with, Or if I'm talking to a club in Scandinavia and they're saying to me, well, what players do you have in Africa, or what players could you recommend? They may look at a player and say, well, no, he's too small, or he doesn't fit the kind of thing that I have in my mind of what an African player should be. And I think that's always a danger. And I think it's something that we have to overcome. And I think those kind of unconscious biases, while it's not a sexy topic to sort of discuss and think about, it really is quite important. There are so many sort of gracefully talented players that probably won't get the opportunity because European clubs are maybe more looking for maybe the Michael Essien type or the Claude Makelele type cast, or the strong kind of centre back, as you've mentioned there, or the big striker, the big tall striker. I do a lot of work in semi-professional football in England as well, and funnily enough, you do see that quite often as well in England. Kind of the tall target man striker in the semi-pro game has a lot more of a chance because he's big and physical, than maybe kind of a player who can't hold the ball up as well, but maybe technically better. So overcoming those challenges is certainly a big area when you look at player recruitment in African football. I think that comes down to the responsibility of kind of heads of recruitment, sporting directors within the European space, to maybe kind of widen their thinking of what they look at when they're looking to the African market, and what do they look for, and maybe being a little bit more broad in their thinking. I'll give you an example. Kind of, I suppose, Sultan, you'll know this player. Harold, you'll know this player, Alan Okello. Now, on Just Football, we named him as one of the most exciting young talents a couple of years ago. We do kind of a young talent series, or we used to do it. And Alan Okello made our sort of top 20 of players to look out for. I've always thought in my mind Alan Okello would be perfect in sort of Norway or Sweden. And I look at his game, and he's very similar. There's a team in Norway called Bodø Glimt. Now, they've just smashed the league records, scored like nearly 100 goals in a season. They're now playing in the Conference League. They're in the same group as AS Roma. Won the title for the first time in their history, and they've got very technical players, and they've got very nice sort of gifted players who can play off both feet and that kind of thing. But sometimes when you look at, and I'm not naming that club particularly, but sometimes if you were to look at Alan Okello, would he get the opportunities in maybe a Scandinavia or somewhere like that because he is a technically gifted player? Perhaps not, because they may look for maybe the more, a defensive midfielder. They may have a typecast in their mind. And sometimes that can hold people back. And I suppose it's up to us, people working in the industry, to try and confound those stereotypes and sort of try and open people's thinking. Now, how you do that is a huge challenge, and it can be quite difficult to convince people. I've had conversations with clubs where they will literally look at a player for 5 seconds and say he's too short. I remember an under-20 African game, and the player, he went on. I won't name the player, but he went on to have a decent career. He's doing very well. But I remember talking to the scout, and literally within seconds, his feedback was, "No, he's too short. He won't make it." And he was about 6 foot, I think, but he wasn't that 6'4" strapping centre back that traditionally you might want from an African player. So those are the challenges, I suppose, that are faced, and I'd be keen to hear people's thoughts on that. I'm very happy to take questions as well from anyone in the audience. People have been patient listening, and hear feedback as well from Sultan and Harold as well on that.
Yeah, we're going to have some few questions in a bit, but before I go back to Harold, I want to still stick with you, Jonathan. We again, you've mentioned some of these problems. We have seen the sharks in the industry and all these people you can't trust and all that. But how much is mentality? For someone who has left his home country, has left his friends, he has gone to a new country, maybe for a new challenge, and he has new friends. He has to get used to a new culture, new language, and stuff like that. How much is mentality a defining factor in a player who has maybe gone to Scandinavia or the Swedens of this world, and how much can, because I was in one of the spaces a couple of days ago, and one of the players, a Ugandan player who is playing in, I think, Romania, he came on board and he was talking of how some of his friends, maybe they didn't want it more. They weren't willing to maybe have that hustle mentality, and they didn't make it, but they were maybe actually better players than him. So how much is that mentality thing a factor in all this recruitment process?
Yeah, great question. It's a massive factor, and I think it's probably the defining factor. I mean, this isn't just African football. this applies anywhere. You know, you take your average English player, and if you pick them up and put them in, you know, in Italy, for example, how you adapt is going to be a big indicator of how you succeed. And that's just not just a challenge strictly for African players, I think. But you're right, you know. So I used to live. My interest in Swedish football came because I lived in Sweden, and I lived in Gothenburg, and one of the clubs has a huge track record of recruitment with African players. Is Beko Häcken. Now they're based in Gothenburg, a club quite close to my heart, and you know they've had players like Alassane Camara, players like at the moment they have a player, you know, from Ivory Coast called Benny Traore, a young player, and kind of trying to get them to adapt to, you know, you come from if you're coming from Nigeria or Ghana, even me from England, which is used to a cold country, trust me, the climate in Sweden when I first arrived took some time to get used to. I remember going to a supermarket at 11 o'clock at night once, thinking, you know, let me go and get something to eat, and it was the middle of winter, and I'll never forget the cold that night in terms of walking to the supermarket. I certainly learned my lesson there. And so, you know, if you're coming from Ghana or somewhere like a hot country like that, it's probably even more difficult. And I remember Alassane Camara, and he's nicknamed Crespo. He's no longer at Häcken now, but he gave a really good interview about his life and how he adapted to the climate in Sweden and Scandinavian football, how difficult he found it. But these are things that you kind of have to adapt to. I think he married a Swedish lady in the end, and you know he managed to have the right environment around him. He managed to get through those challenges, the difficulties, and it can be very lonely and isolating moving to a completely new country. And if you're not fully focused on kind of your end goal, you know, wanting to be a footballer and wanting to make it and maybe provide for your family, you can lose your way, because there's not only challenges, but there's also new environments, new distractions, things that can get you carried away. So that mentality and that strength of mind will always determine how well a player does, how well a player adapts, and that's not necessarily, like I say, just for African players. That's also for any player within football. But I think the interesting part for me is kind of the key part of it, and of course, World Mental Health Day. And I think one of the interesting things that there's a very good interview, as I mentioned, with Kamara, who's a good reference point because he had quite a successful career in Sweden. He mentioned kind of that the biggest challenge for him was the mental health side of it, and the kind of he moved there, and the people who had helped him move there didn't really have that much kind of say or influence on him when he moved there. There was no real support system necessarily. The club did what they could. Obviously, they gave him accommodation, but he struggled with the kind of day-to-day, having someone to talk to, maybe helping with his challenges. And I really feel that is a massive part of it in terms of how players can adapt, because we do sometimes, as an industry, look at as an industry as players as kind of commodities. They transfer for millions of pounds, and we expect them to kind of just fend for themselves. Well, you're paid loads of money, so you should be able to deal with it. And I don't think sometimes we appreciate the challenges that it can take from going from one country to another, re-establishing yourself whilst also performing to a higher level, improving your game, developing, if you see what I mean. And so these are huge challenges that people have to overcome. And I think that resilience does help African players when they do get to the top. If you look at someone like Sadio Mane, you know, the challenges he's had to overcome every single step along the way, that resilience can help you when you're at Liverpool in a high pressure environment. But I really think sort of someone like myself, maybe, or Sultan, kind of working in that space of it now, working maybe more on the player side or helping with recruitment. I think making sure there's a support system for the player. You know, they might be leaving their family, for example, in many cases, and their family thousands of miles away. Making sure there's that support system for them, making sure their needs are met to be able to adapt to the new environment, whilst also making them aware of the level that they're going to, because often it is a very high step up, and just adapting to that is a challenge in itself. So I think from my point of view, I'm constantly thinking about that when you're looking at a player and profiling a player to maybe go to Scandinavia. And I see some people in the audience who've had experience in this area, I think, who, you know, I see someone perhaps who worked at Right to Dream Academy, for example, and they're very, very good with the way they model that mental modeling in terms of helping players as people as well, holistically, not just as a commodity that you're sold, and once we've got the money or got extracted the value, we leave them to themselves. It's something that I think about quite a lot, and I think that can often be the difference between a player that makes it and a player that maybe loses it a bit along the way and maybe goes off the radar.
Okay, okay, okay. I've been going through the people, some of the people we have in the audience. I think let me see. We have uh, we have some pretty good guys in the audience, but I don't know if Mr. Shafiq Biekwaso, you're an ex player. You've played for AC Villa, for Express Proline, and I don't know, is it possible to bring you on board, Mr. Shafiq? I'm sending you an invite to speak. Can you come on board and maybe give us some few insights on something, some of the challenges that you have tackled? Mr.
I think
Shafiq,
that's
I don't know if
Shafiq
he's
Bisaso.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's it.
very, very, very good local coach. I think he's away for studies
Yeah.
right now, but yeah, fantastic lad. Formerly at ProLine.
Yeah, I wanted to have his perspective. But Harold, before I bring on Shafiq, if he accepts the invite, we have had stories of age cheating a lot in African football, and it's been part of
Yeah,
the game for a very, very long time. You know, and we
yeah,
have had situations where you even get it from the coaches where they're saying this kid is 17, but he has a 15-year-old football age. His football age is 15 years, or he's 20 years old, but his football age is 10 years old. You know,
yeah.
stuff like that. How much has this affected the be it the development process or the career process of some of the African players?
Before I answer the question, let me first reference something small on mentality, just to add to Jonathan's point. I was
Okay.
watching an interview by Arsene Wenger recently. It's not a recent interview, but I only saw it a few days ago, and he was talking about the fact that only 1% of the players in academies in England make it to the Premier League. And he says that 67% of the players who are in the academies between 16 and 20 are not in football anymore at the age of 21. They have given up on football. And he was calling upon football academies to pay some attention to the mental coaching and mentor aspects of the game, and to give an all-round and balanced education to these boys and help them cope with the huge demands of the game. The other thing that comes to mind when someone talks about the mentality and the coping mechanisms and things like that is Ibrahim Sekaja, the former Uganda Cranes captain, the guy who came from
Top player.
top lad. But what stands out in his story is that when he left Uganda, he went to Argentina and played for 3 different clubs in Argentina. I don't know how many Ugandans. I mean, if you can't cope in Europe, then you'll definitely not stay in Argentina for a day. But he went to Argentina and played for 3 different clubs there, and then finally he was signed to Red Bull Salzburg in Europe. For me, Sekaja's story is a story of mental strength and persistence, which very many young lads in our game need to learn to have. The direct opposite of Sekaja's story is Joel Madondo. We all know what happened to Joel recently while he was away in Casablanca.
Yeah, very sad story.
Yeah, very sad story. But yeah, having said that, I'll speak about age cheating. This thing is real. It happens in Uganda, in Africa, in South America, and very, very, very many footballers have been victim of this. It's a vice that has eaten up the industry. You will, on very many occasions, hear stories of footballers who have retired in their 30s officially, but I mean, people who know them are way, 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 way older. We've had jokes about the Nigerian footballers like Martin Obafemi and others. But these days, it's been curbed, largely curbed, because most footballers are now coming through the formal system, formal academies, formal junior teams, and formal age grade systems. I mean, under 15, under 17, under 19, under 20 now, under 23, and things like that. And usually for someone to play for the under 20, for the under 17 in a competition like the FUFA Junior League, if I may say, or the recent Sekafa under 17 tournament, you must have passed the MRI test, which confirms your age. It's a bone test that helps establish whether you're above 17. And that has gone a long way in eradicating that age cheating especially in Africa. That's kudos to FUFA here because it has helped. You see that most of the lads that are coming through the system are actually of that age, the age they say they are. I'll give a small example that's close to Bright Stars, like many of the examples I've given today. We have a lad from the junior team called Issa Bugembe. Issa Bugembe played at the under-17 tournament in Rwanda recently, and when his picture leaked to the media, okay, not leaked, when his picture came out in the media, everybody said he was above 17 and there is no way he could be under 17. But I have seen Issa, I have been around him, and when you actually look at him, he looks under 17. His body has matured faster than his actual age, but in addition to that, he has passed MRI tests on 3 occasions, and these things are usually very accurate. He's passed them here on the local level with Bright Stars trying to play in the Juniors League, and he's also passed them at the Sekafa level. So yeah, the vice is still there, but it's dying out because of what I've just mentioned. And yeah, that's what I can say on that.